Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all of you. It's my pleasure to announce a roundtable organized by UN Development Fund and Global Covenant of Mayors. And it's my honor to invite Mrs. Asma Jina, Senior Advisor at the Global Covenant of Mayors, to preside and moderate this table. Please, the floor is yours. Would you like to have a mic, or is it okay? Should be working. Please, yeah? Okay. Super. And I think we can applaud them. They deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And good afternoon, and welcome to today's session, Exploring Ambitious Decentralized Subnational Climate Finance Outcomes. I think there might be a little bit of feedback, so please bear with me. Welcome, Gregor. My name is Asma Jina, and I'm the Senior Global Advisor for City Resilience, Climate Finance, and Inclusive Action at the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. GCOM is the world's largest alliance for city climate leadership, with a shared long-term vision of promoting and supporting voluntary action to combat climate change and move to a low-carbon resilient society. GCOM works to organize and mobilize cities and local governments to be active contributors to global climate solutions. Driven by efforts of cities, local governments and regions, GCOM works to facilitate regional adaptation to meet local level needs and ambitions under one united, all-encompassing vision. We're delighted to be co-organizing this session here today with UNCDF, and we have a special appearance from the high-level champions team too. So as we know, cities are at the forefront of the climate crisis. More than half the world's population, exceeding 2/3 by 2050, 2/3 of global energy consumption, more than 70% of global greenhouse emissions, and disproportionate exposure to a wide range of climate risks. Cities are critical vehicles for climate action implementation. However, insufficient access to finance is a major barrier preventing cities from realizing their climate mitigation and adaptation ambitions. Especially in our cities, there is massive economic and development opportunity around climate solutions and clean energy, and the potential to keep us within 1.5 degrees. We know that climate finance for cities in particular is essential to achieving the Paris Agreement climate goals. We cannot have the necessary impact unless more financing is mobilized for net zero, adaptation, resilience, and mitigation climate solutions in cities. Without the trillions more in finance, cities cannot adapt to the impacts of climate change, nor will cities be able to meaningfully contribute to global carbon reductions. Achieving global climate goals requires larger, stronger, and faster investment. So I'm really pleased to have you all join us, and we've got some very interesting action-oriented panelists here today, and we'll start with Gregor. So many of you will know Gregor, and he's going to help us understand the scale of the city climate finance gap. Gregor is Global Ambassador of GCOM, helping almost 2,500 cities tackle climate and energy solutions. He's also Executive Vice President of Nexi Building Solutions, which produces green buildings and infrastructure across North America. Gregor served 3 terms as Mayor of Vancouver from 2008 to 2018, and during his tenure, Vancouver's economy led the country, and the city achieved record-setting years for building housing, childcare and job space, growing public transit ridership, and investment, as well as achieving the lowest carbon emissions in North America. Over to you, Gregor.
Thank you, Asma, and good afternoon, everyone. Setting the context and the scale of the challenge for cities and accessing climate finance. As Asma said, GCOM, Global Covenant of Mayors, is 12,700 plus cities around the world, 144 countries that have made commitments on climate action. And of those 12,000, about 700 of those cities now have developed very clear, detailed climate action plans. The focus of our activity in the coming years is to help them secure finance so that they can implement these plans. So the actions of cities are obviously critical to solving climate crisis. We have to see action at the local level. That's where the majority of the infrastructure is built. It's where the majority of pollution and energy use happens. So the solutions have to be delivered on the ground in cities. Cities do not have the financial capacity, the fiscal bandwidth to implement the changes that we know are necessary, whether that's the transition with energy from fossil to renewable energy, the energy efficiency investments, all of the mitigation steps which are being tackled by cities primarily in the global north are expensive and they're beyond the means of cities, even though those cities are relatively well financed compared to the global south. In the global south, I think generally speaking, adaptation is what's really critical. The infrastructure that is needed to survive climate impacts without deepening the tragedies that we are seeing mount across the world. Those cities in the global south almost unanimously do not have the resources to tackle adaptation. They don't contribute pollution at the same level of cities in the global north, so mitigation isn't as big a factor, but ensuring that the growth is certainly concentrated in the cities in the global south. Cities in Africa, by 2100, will be 17 of the 20 largest cities in the world. So building the cities across Africa with adaptation in mind is essential. Having the finance to build the right infrastructure to help these cities basically do the right thing and be low carbon, resilient, sustainable, prosperous cities into the future. That's what's critical. The scale, the magnitude of this challenge for cities is seen as a gap of about, in US dollars, about $2 trillion, which need to be invested in sustainable and climate resilient urban infrastructure through 2030. So that's in this decade, several trillion dollars. That is a small fraction of the scale of the global economy. It sounds, there's a lot of zeros. It sounds like an enormous amount of money. At the same time, in proportion to the global economy and proportion to the $30 trillion that every year is saved and invested in the global economy, this is a smaller fraction that needs to be invested on the front lines in cities. But that scale of investment over the next 5 years requires a debt and financing strategy that recognizes there are very difficult challenges, particularly in the developing world, in the cities that are on the front lines of extreme growth without the capacity to deal with that. So these trillions in investment that are needed by mid-century to limit further warming as well as deal with the impacts and the adaptation are really critical, and I would say need to focus in the global south where that capacity is stretched thin. So I think we are looking at new tools coming to the table. I think there's a sense of optimism at the voice of cities being encouraged by the COP28 presidency. We're seeing, I think, more interest in seeing cities and local communities represented and at the table along with national leaders as we go into the COP28 cycle here. We have to have that voice strong from a city perspective. I think you'll see more mayors, certainly from GCOM, C40, ICLE, UCLG, LGMA. All of the city networks are organizing right now to make sure that cities, our mayors, and elected leaders are present and have the opportunity to be at the table, because this need is great and it needs to be translated into action. That's ultimately what we're all calling for here. It's one thing to get together and talk. We need to see the walk, and that requires significant new tools and massive increase in the opportunity for cities to deploy climate finance into projects that make a difference on the ground for people and change the direction that we're headed in terms of impacts on our people, on their health and well-being, and their opportunity for prosperity and opportunity to benefit from this transformation of our economy. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Asma, in the hopes that the work that we do right now, we have urgency, we have passion, we have commitment. We see that this change is going to happen in our lifetime. We're the generation that's being called upon and in leadership to deliver this change on behalf of all future generations and all life on this planet. So let's step up and do our absolute best to make the change we need to see. Thank you, and back to you, Esma.
Thank you very much for that, Gregor. I'll pass now to Dr. George Youssef, who is online. If we can get him on, fantastic, thank you. So just a quick introduction. Dr. George Youssef is the Mayor of Menges since 2012 and is a member of its Agricultural Cooperative Association and a university teacher since 2000. He's on the board of GCOM, recently joined us, and is committed to vertical alignment between municipalities, national authorities and non-state actors. Dr. Youssef will talk to us a little bit about the challenges at the municipal level and some of the ways that he is addressing them for Menges. Thank you.
You hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Excuse me, I want to talk in French. Bonjour à tous. Je vous remercie et je remercie les organisateurs de m'avoir invité pour partager le point de vue et l'expérience de la municipalité de Menges. Menges est une petite ville libanaise localisée dans le département de Akkar, à l'extrême nord du Liban, à la frontière avec la Syrie. Menges est très riche en patrimoine naturel et culturel. La municipalité de Menges a réussi à inscrire son patrimoine naturel et culturel sur la liste indicative du patrimoine mondial de l'UNESCO. Le Liban actuellement traverse une crise économique et financière très importante. Depuis 2019, le budget des municipalités libanaises n'est en aucun cas supérieur à quelques milliers de dollars, qui ne suffisent même pas à payer les agents de la municipalité. Alors, les municipalités libanaises sont face à beaucoup de défis. À part le manque de ressources financières et humaines, la crise des réfugiés syriens, aujourd'hui, plus que le tiers de la population sont des réfugiés syriens. Ces réfugiés nécessitent des services de base et beaucoup plus d'infrastructures. Menges est trop affecté aussi par la désertification et la déforestation et le changement climatique et surtout par le manque d'investissement et de partenariats publics-privés. Face à tous ces défis, la municipalité de Menges a multiplié ses efforts et a cherché à transformer ces défis en opportunités. Alors, ma ville a réussi à attirer des partenaires nationaux et internationaux. Elle travaille avec des plans d'action et des stratégies scientifiques. Elle participe à des formations diplômantes dans les domaines du développement durable, la coopération décentralisée et la bonne gouvernance. Ma municipalité a réussi à localiser des opportunités de financement et monter des partenariats avec des universités et des ONG. Elle répond presque à tous les appels à projets au Liban. Parmi ces projets, la municipalité de Menges aussi a adhéré à la Convention des maires depuis 2014. Ma municipalité a mis au point un plan d'action climat et énergie renouvelable. La municipalité a participé à toutes les conférences onusiennes sur le climat depuis 2016. La municipalité de Menges a implémenté les actions de son plan climat. Elle a implémenté sur son territoire une station photovoltaïque pour combler les coupures du courant du réseau national. Au Liban, on a un maximum d'électricité du réseau national, un maximum de 2 heures par 24 heures. La municipalité a changé tout l'éclairage public traditionnel et énergivore en éclairage LED et économe. Plusieurs campagnes de forestation ont été réalisées depuis 2014. Plus que 25 000 arbres ont été plantés. La municipalité a plus que doublé la superficie de sa forêt noire. Les ressources naturelles sont très bien exploitées par des projets en dehors du bois, non-wood product. Une usine de fabrication de briquettes a été implémentée pour transformer les déchets forestiers et agricoles en briquettes pour le chauffage. Cette usine produit 2 tonnes par heure et on a implémenté à côté une unité de production d'huile essentielle de laurier. Les 2 unités sont gérées maintenant par la municipalité, mais la municipalité est en cours de signer un partenariat public-privé. Comme on a une stratégie d'agrandir ces ressources en dehors du bois, la municipalité a trouvé un partenaire du secteur privé pour réaliser cela. La municipalité a implémenté aussi une unité de collecte des eaux pluviales et un plan d'action de prévention et de combattre les feux de forêt. La municipalité de Menges gère le secteur d'eau potable. Exceptionnellement pour le Liban, on a l'eau potable 24 heures sur 24. La municipalité gère le secteur de l'eau d'irrigation dans le domaine agricole. La municipalité traite aussi par une station d'épuration plus que le tiers de ses eaux usées. Plusieurs projets pour la protection et la valorisation du patrimoine culturel ont été implémentés pour développer le tourisme local, dont un projet de coopération avec l'Université de Genève. La municipalité reste ouverte à toute coopération. J'ai été honoré cette année par ma nomination membre du board de la Global Covenant of Mayors. J'espère être à la hauteur de leur ambition. Merci pour votre attention et je suis à votre disposition pour répondre à vos questions.
Thank you very much, Mayor Youssef. So now we'll head to Mr. David Jackson, who is the Global Director of Local Transformative Finance for UNCDF, and he'll tell us a little bit about the expansion of the Locale facility and the Southern Mediterranean. In 2009, David became head of UNCDF Asia and Pacific Office, where he designed the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility, a global mechanism that enables local governments in the least developed countries to access climate finance for resilient investments. Recently, he has focused on the challenges of unlocking domestic capital markets for investments in local economic development. In May 2013, he was appointed director of UNCDF's Local Development Finance Practice in New York. Thank you very much for joining us, David.
Thank you very much. And I understand there will be a PowerPoint presentation. Is it up?
Not yet.
No, but maybe before it comes up or while it's coming up, I'll just say a few words of introduction and then we can go through it. So, indeed, we designed the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility because it became a realization that effectively, when it comes to climate adaptation in particular, that is a local government responsibility. UNCDF has a long history of working on local government finance, and it became apparent about a decade ago, or a little bit over a decade ago, that an increasing number of the investments that were financed by local governments had something to do with climate change. But climate change was not yet recognized as a global challenge as it is now, let's say 15 years ago or so. And in fact, the first ICLEI Resilient Cities Conference wasn't held until 2010, and we participated in that conference. One thing that became apparent at the Resilient Cities Conference in 2010 was that cities, Vancouver, in fact, I think it was David Cadman was present at that conference, was saying, look, we have this extra cost now. We have to adapt to this thing called climate change. And there's no financing stream for this. And so it's basically an additional burden on our budget that was not recognized nor by central government, and nor did taxpayers necessarily want to meet that burden either. And if that's the case for cities like Vancouver, imagine for the Global South, where the impact of climate change was even more pronounced, both physically on the ground and also on the budgets. And so the local climate adaptive living facility was designed in order to be able to connect local governments with global climate finance. Of course, it comes through national systems, as we'll explain in a moment, but it provides that direct connection between local governments and global climate finance, specifically on adaptation. So next slide, please. There we go. So why give support to the local level? Well, I basically explained that. And this is water management, land use planning, building regulations, agricultural practices. This is basically the job of local governments. Now, climate finance tends to be locked up in ministries of the environment. There's nothing wrong with them. National government programs. It does not tend to be transferred directly to local governments. And that's what we intend to address through Locale. So that's the purpose of the local climate adaptive living facility. So I'm going to go to, there seems to be a time lag. Next slide, please. There we go. Please stop at that slide. I'm not sure if that was me or somebody else who made that happen. But here you can see a diagram of the Locale mechanism. So you can see global climate finance passing through central government ministries and then passing down to the local level through something that is called PBCRG. And then you see the watering can, which is essentially a top-up to the regular transfers that local governments receive from central government. And this top-up, this additional grant, it is a grant, is designed to meet this incremental cost of climate adaptation that local governments are facing. And then you see the diagram, the various items of expenditure that this can meet. But at essence, local governments perform a risk assessment. It is calculated the climate risks that they face, and they are free to use this money to address those risks in a way that is measurable, because you can measure the degree to which those risks and vulnerabilities have been reduced. And the resources is fully fungible. It's a performance-based grant system, which means local governments do not have to apply for this money. They receive it following the scoping mission and the signing of the agreement with the host government. And then after the event, there is a performance-based assessment to verify that they have correctly used these resources on reducing their risk and their vulnerability. If they have not done that, then they fall out of the system or there is some kind of penalty. It all depends on what is negotiated in each country. So the essence of Locale is it plugs in to national country systems. It's not a project in the classical sense. Therefore, it has very few overheads. You work with the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Local Government, the National Audit Commission. You plug this system in, and it enables local adaptation with global reporting against national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions, which is what unlocks that climate finance. So there is this climate additionality that is clearly reported there. That's the essence of the Locale system. Now, I'm going to jump forwards a few more slides because I imagine that most people in the room, well, there you can see the different sectors, agriculture, water, etc., which are all local government responsibilities. But I imagine that most people in the room are from the Achamed region. So you can see that Locale is now covering very many countries across the world. But more specifically, and this is a delay here, we are beginning Locale in Tunisia. So Locale Tunisia is about to begin, and this will be quite a large program with funding from DG NEAR, from the European Union. There is Locale Achamed, which basically covers the North Africa region as a whole, including, I think you can see there, the flag of Morocco, so that will be very welcome in this room. I understand yesterday that at least 50% of the people in any one meeting are from Morocco and 50% are not. So at least half of you are happy to see this. And in Morocco, there'll be basically the scoping mission to look at the form this mechanism would take were it to come into being in Morocco. And one of the slides that was skipped there due to the laggy remote control was this ISO slide. So you can see there that Local now has this ISO, this international standard applied to it. So that means that providing the government is applying this standard, it can access basically the finance through this mechanism that we are building. So that's the essence of what Local is all about. It is recognized under Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement as a non-market approach. Now, I'd like to make, if I may, make a couple of larger points before we finish. So it's recognized as a non-market approach because essentially climate adaptation is a public good. Now, I think, you know, and Gregor alluded to this a little bit earlier. So there's a lot of talk about bringing the private sector in, we need these billions, etc. But these billions, yes, they do need to come in, or even these trillions. But I think we need to be very clear-headed about this. That if we're going to adapt to climate change and if we're going to cut our emissions, cities and local governments are at the center of this. But this requires transformative finance, not simply a pipeline of bankable projects on the terms of the banks. So I get tired of hearing people say, well, we just need a pipeline of bankable projects. No, I'm sorry. A pipeline of bankable projects will give you shopping malls, hotels, lots of other things that we already have. It's not going to give you transformative investments because transformative investments require a different way of looking at what needs to be done. Firstly, all cities, wherever they are in the world, are adaptations to the prevailing climate. That's why Tangier looks different from Reykjavik, which looks different from Ouagadougou. All cities are designed according to the prevailing climate. Now, there is an adaptation that needs to be made because climate change is accelerating. A lot of that is a public good, it's a public investment, but it's public investment in future private sector activity. It's public investment in our future. It's not a subsidy, it's an investment that enables private sector activity to take place. So it's not against or counter, it's a requirement. And we see this particularly in lots of places where Local works, where unless the roads are in good order, unless the bridges are there, it's not possible for agriculture or any activity to take place. So you need this public investment. That is a large part of adaptation. Then you also, when it comes to the blended finance, you need also to meet this financing gap, because quite often something that is purely bankable is not necessarily going to be transformative. And an example very close to home is in the city of Chefchaouen here in Morocco, where we have worked with the city government on an investment which will enable the installation of solar lighting. That's green lighting powered by the sun. And this will replace the current street lighting which is generated by fossil fuels. Now, in fact, if this is a transformative investment, it's a combination of a loan and a grant. It is possible to repay the costs of the investment with the energy savings made through the solar street lighting without increasing the burden on the local government. So that is fundamental. It is blended finance. There is a loan to be repaid, but that loan will be repaid with the energy savings made by introducing the solar street lighting in the first place. And yesterday, some of you may have seen that we signed an agreement with the region of Tangier, and that is now to take this to scale across the northern region of Morocco. So that's one example. I'm going to give two quick examples, sorry to hog the floor, of the transformative financing that we need. A second one is quite often when cities are coming forwards with transformative finance proposals and options, the Ministry of Finance says, well, I'm sorry, I don't think so, because anything the city does, if it involves some kind of loan or some kind of bond, it adds to the national borrowing or the national, what's known as the national contingent liability. So there's an assumption in global finance that even if Vancouver does something, at the end of the day, Canada will chip in. Canada will bail it out. It's maybe an incorrect assumption, but that is the assumption that is made by the IMF and by others. So that's a big block that is holding up unlocking finance for climate resilience investment in cities, because quite often cities have quite good fundamentals. They have growing populations, they have growing tax bases, they have growing land values. So yes, they need their public transport, but how to unlock that without the Ministry of Finance saying no? So we have come up with a guarantee facility for cities that will guarantee cities separate from a guarantee from the central government. And it will mean that central government will be able to be more flexible, because this guarantee facility will sit outside government, but will guarantee the cities in any case, working, of course, with the Ministry of Finance, but taking that risk off their books. This is called the City Guarantee Facility. It's funded by the European Fund for Sustainable Development. UNCDF will be managing it. And we're very happy that the European Union has actually come up with this innovative proposal. We're following a joint report that we produced together with UN Habitat and the European Union and the city on financing sustainable urban development, and a city guarantee facility was one of the recommendations. Finally, there is also now an entity called the International Municipal Investment Fund, which was something that we also co-created. It's managed by Meridian in Paris, and it's capitalized, it's now investing. The purpose of the International Municipal Investment Fund is to take an equity stake rather than a loan. So again, you avoid this problem of the sovereign liability. So if a city, for example, wants to create, let's say, an electric tramway system, a public transport system, then this kind of fund can come in. It will build that tramway system, and it will take a share of the revenue of the trams for the next 30 years in repayment of its investments. But at least it means that there is no debt as such, so that is owed by the city or by the central government. And that has been designed as a city-friendly fund, and UNCDF manages the pipeline to make sure that it's on the terms of the city, not on the terms of the financier. Of course, they need to agree at the end of the day, but it approximates as close as possible what the city needs from the investment. So to summarize, we need city-friendly, local government-friendly, transformative finance that will enable us to make the transition that has been talked about, and that's different from simply saying we need a pipeline of bankable projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you so much for taking us through in some technical detail some of these really interesting, innovative mechanisms that are being placed in real time. The questions are about scale. I particularly enjoyed yesterday your point about not just growth, but transformative growth. And that's what we're here for, to discuss sustainable, equitable, resilient infrastructure, but also how do we design these new mechanisms, these new funding vehicles? How do we scale them? And they cannot come as just funding and financing. They need to come with technical assistance. We know that particularly Global South, there is a big issue around technical capacity, about resources, and it's about working hand in hand with cities and municipal authorities to be able to advance some of these solutions. So thank you so much for taking the time. Fantastic. And now we have a great opportunity to hear a little bit more about some of these solutions from Ms. Christelle Alverne, who's going to tell us a little bit about the renovation of local public lighting, a little bit more detail about the local public lighting network. Christelle is UNCDF's regional coordinator for West and Central Africa, based in Dakar, Senegal. She has worked for 20 years in local development and fiscal decentralization for the agency of the French Prime Minister, the Municipal Development Programme of UNCDF, and also as a researcher and professor on urban and regional planning throughout France, Canada, Senegal, and Egypt. Christelle holds a PhD in geographic economics and is a graduate in political science from the University of Aix-en-Provence. Thank you, Christelle, over to you.
Thank you very much. If you allow me, I will speak in French as well. J'ai aussi une présentation, donc si on peut la projeter, ça m'aiderait aussi à expliquer de quoi il s'agit. Peut-être en préalable, je voudrais simplement mentionner 3 points qui me semblent extrêmement importants. Le premier, c'est qu'on parle beaucoup effectivement des enjeux, des défis qui se posent, notamment dans les pays du Sud. Et merci à ce panel de parler des solutions qui sont possibles pour ces problèmes. Et je pense que les solutions effectivement existent et qu'elles sont testées dans certains pays du monde et que c'est important de les disséminer et de pouvoir en fait échanger sur ces solutions et les répliquer peut-être aussi ailleurs. Le deuxième point que je voulais évoquer aussi en préambule, c'est l'importance des villes moyennes. On parle des villes en général, mais il est vrai que les villes moyennes ont un rôle extrêmement stratégique à jouer. Non seulement elles sont le squelette des États, et elles jouent un rôle en fait dans le relais des politiques nationales, mais aussi dans la transformation des économies rurales. Ce sont elles en fait qui offrent les services au niveau local. Elles jouent un rôle dans la transformation de l'agriculture, elles jouent aussi un rôle dans l'offre de services de base, et elles sont souvent celles en fait qui concentrent le plus la croissance démographique. Donc, un regard particulier sur ces petites villes moyennes me semble extrêmement important. Et puis, troisième point, et ça a été aussi évoqué, ces villes ont souvent peu de moyens, et en fait, il faut arriver à trouver des solutions parfois à zéro coût, mais à beaucoup de bénéfices, ou bien trouver des nouveaux channels, des nouveaux moyens de catalyser en fait des financements au niveau local. Donc ceci étant dit, effectivement, on a parlé, et David Jackson a parlé en fait de ce que UNCDF offre. Notre rôle en tant qu'agence des Nations Unies, c'est vraiment de trouver des solutions financières et de développer des mécanismes qui vont permettre en fait à ces fonds qui existent au niveau mondial, et certains fonds existent, mais ne sont pas catalysés jusqu'au niveau des pays les moins avancés ou des pays en développement. Donc comment faire en sorte que ces financements, les fonds qui existent au niveau mondial, puissent effectivement être transférés au niveau de ceux qui en ont besoin, les populations bien sûr les plus vulnérables, et comment les villes en fait peuvent jouer un rôle. Et c'est ça vraiment le grand défi qui se pose aujourd'hui pour nous, c'est de trouver en fait quels sont les bons mécanismes à développer. Alors je vais prendre ma présentation qui est ici parce que je vois qu'elle a du mal à arriver sur le... Alors ce que je vais vous présenter en fait, c'est un autre mécanisme dont David a un petit peu parlé, qui est en fait ce que nous avons commencé à tester à Chefchaouen et que nous entendons répliquer à l'échelle du Maroc, mais peut-être aussi dans d'autres pays. Et c'est l'idée vraiment de trouver comment on peut... Ah, ça c'est la petite machine pour aller en avant, c'est ça? J'appuie où? Ici, d'accord. Donc comment arriver à faire en fait d'un modèle d'économie d'énergie un modèle valide pour une petite ville et ensuite réplicable au niveau régional. Alors, UNCDF, donc on l'a mentionné un petit peu, hein, c'est effectivement notre rôle, c'est d'accompagner l'accès au financement, notamment pour les villes moyennes. Et donc, local est un parfait exemple de ça, où on essaye de faire en sorte que le fonds vert puisse arriver au niveau des pays les moins avancés et ensuite au niveau des collectivités locales. Et l'exemple de Chefchaouen est un autre exemple, et de ce que nous entendons faire au Maroc, un autre exemple de ces solutions que nous cherchons à mettre en place. Alors, à Chefchaouen, donc la solution que nous avons cherché à apporter, c'est une solution pour pouvoir moderniser en fait le réseau électrique. Donc Chefchaouen, qui est aussi appelée la ville bleue, une des villes qui est les plus présentes sur Instagram par exemple, et qui est très connue et qui est une superbe ville. C'est une ville de 42 000 habitants et qui donc accueille environ 70 à 90 000 touristes par an. Le budget de la ville est de 6,4 millions de dollars, dont 3 millions à peu près qui sont reçus du gouvernement central. La ville de Chefchaouen avait un plan municipal qui a été développé en 2016, donc 2016-2022, qui était basé sur 5 axes. Améliorer le cadre de vie, préserver l'environnement, maintenir en fait le capital architectural et culturel de la ville, développer des économies, développer le secteur économique et supporter la gouvernance locale. Et le plan de rénovation en fait le plan de rénovation de l'éclairage public fait partie donc de ce plan. Notre objectif était donc d'accompagner la ville de Chefchaouen à améliorer ce plan d'éclairage public avec un mécanisme de financement innovant. En termes donc d'éclairage public, Chefchaouen, c'est à peu près une centaine de kilomètres, donc 4000 points lumineux qu'il fallait en fait rénover. Et on se rend compte que, bien sûr, ces points d'éclairage ponctionnaient énormément en fait le budget communal. La ville avait depuis 2018 commencé en fait à rénover l'ancienne Médina, dont l'objectif c'était d'étendre un petit peu ce qui avait déjà été fait dans l'ancienne Médina, mais aussi de rendre en fait le réseau d'éclairage public conforme en fait aux règles et le mettre à l'échelle en termes de sécurité et d'économie d'énergie. Et de faire en sorte en fait que les coûts d'énergie et les coûts de maintenance soient réduits. Une image simplement pour représenter de quoi il s'agit. Donc vous voyez bien sûr sur la gauche là où le réseau est défectueux et comment en fait la ville a déjà commencé à rénover le réseau, notamment sur la Médina, mais avec l'idée donc de prolonger en fait ce qui avait été fait. Je viens en fait au modèle qui a été utilisé parce que c'est ce qui nous intéresse et ce que nous cherchons à appliquer. En fait, le remboursement des dépenses d'énergie va se faire sur les économies d'énergie. Donc en fait, la réhabilitation du réseau se fait à zéro coût pour le budget communal. Et en fait, le mécanisme, vous voyez en fait dans le petit schéma, comment les dépenses en termes énergétiques sont importantes et augmentent au fil du temps si on ne rénove pas le réseau, et comment, à partir de la rénovation du réseau, en fait, on peut diminuer les dépenses et donc faire en sorte que la collectivité locale rembourse son prêt sur la base des économies d'énergie. Donc, l'objectif, c'est de faire des économies de façon significative, en diminuant par 2 les dépenses énergétiques, merci, de diminuer les coûts de maintenance, et donc de libérer une partie du budget communal, d'avoir des effets positifs, bien sûr, environnementaux importants, et de renforcer l'activité économique, la sécurité. On sait tous que l'énergie, en fait, et l'éclairage public ont des impacts indirects extrêmement importants. Faciliter aussi le tourisme, rendre la ville plus attractive, plus belle, et faciliter aussi les économies, les activités nocturnes. Voilà, ici en fait on retrouve un petit peu les coûts du projet et le mécanisme en fait qui a été mis en place. C'est vraiment un système de blended finance. Le gouvernement marocain s'est engagé pour 400 000 euros. UNCDF s'est également engagé à travers une subvention pour 200 000 euros et 400 000 euros de prêt à taux zéro. Ce qui permet donc à la commune de rembourser largement en fait les économies sur la base des économies qui sont faites. Les économies sont de l'ordre de 250 000 $, et donc à peu près moitié d'économie par rapport à la facture initiale. Alors bien sûr, l'idée était de faire un premier pilote, mais au-delà de ça, l'idée est de répliquer le mécanisme. Et j'insiste sur le fait que ce qui nous semblait important ici, c'était vraiment de se focaliser sur ces petites villes de taille intermédiaire. Donc l'idée est de répliquer le mécanisme au niveau national. Et donc ce qui nous semble important, c'est qu'en fait, et c'est phénoménal, la dépense énergétique en électricité pour les villes représente la deuxième dépense pour les collectivités locales au Maroc, après les dépenses en ressources humaines. Donc c'est extrêmement important. Et donc diminuer, et l'objectif du gouvernement marocain, c'est donc de diminuer de 20% à peu près la consommation énergétique d'ici 2030. Donc c'est vraiment très haut dans les hiérarchies de la volonté du gouvernement marocain. Un plan national d'éclairage public a été développé. Donc l'idée de cette mise à l'échelle de Chefchaouen, c'est vraiment de contribuer à accompagner le gouvernement marocain, le Royaume du Maroc, à faire des économies d'énergie dans ces petites villes pour lesquelles, en fait, on n'est pas à une échelle suffisante pour aller vers les schémas traditionnels de financement. Aujourd'hui, l'éclairage public par lettre représente à peu près simplement 9% de l'ensemble de l'éclairage public. Donc on a vraiment de la marge pour essayer, tout le reste se fait au sodium, pour accompagner les villes, donc pour devenir beaucoup plus vertes et beaucoup moins consommatrices d'énergie. Et donc se baser sur ces économies pour financer les prêts qui peuvent être faits. J'ai parlé donc du plan national d'électricité publique. L'idée est d'avoir un système combiné avec le ministère de l'Intérieur qui s'est d'ores et déjà engagé à répliquer le mécanisme qui avait été mis en place à Chefchaouen dans les villes secondaires, dans les petites villes, dans d'autres petites villes à hauteur de 30% en matière de subventions. Les villes qui peuvent financer une partie à hauteur de 10-20%, pour la plupart d'entre elles, mais pas toutes. Et ensuite, la nécessité donc de trouver à travers de la dette ou des systèmes de garantie ou de subventions des financements additionnels. Donc, un dialogue est en cours avec l'ARM, l'Agence des régions du Maroc, et également avec la ville de Tanger-Tétouan, on l'a évoqué, donc, et la signature d'une première convention avec la région de Tanger-Tétouan pour répliquer le mécanisme. Je vais peut-être venir sur ce schéma qui explique un petit peu, en fait, comment le dispositif entend être mis à l'échelle à travers un schéma, en fait, de revolving fund, donc d'un fonds qui s'auto-entretient avec un financement initial de la part, en fait, de subventions, de dettes et de garanties d'un certain nombre de partenaires d'agences de développement ou de banques de développement. L'État qui s'engage donc à financer à travers des subventions également ou des garanties une partie de ce revolving fund. La région, pour laquelle en fait la question de l'efficacité énergétique fait partie de ses compétences, pas la question d'éclairage public qui est une question en fait pour les municipalités, mais la question de l'efficience énergétique et pour laquelle la région peut donc apporter son appui. Et donc ce phénomène qui permet d'abonder un revolving fund et d'aller attirer des financements additionnels qui vont pouvoir permettre de financer ce revolving fund et de mettre en place un système d'assistance technique pour pouvoir en fait répliquer le mécanisme pour d'autres villes moyennes dans lesquelles cela peut se faire. Finalement, pour terminer en disant que en fait, l'idée est vraiment d'avoir l'ensemble des partenaires qui travaillent ensemble, de faire des économies d'échelle en répliquant donc, ce qui se fait dans une commune à d'autres communes, en ayant une assistance technique capitalisée au niveau de la région et qu'on peut déployer dans l'ensemble des villes secondaires, avec les municipalités intéressées qui peuvent contribuer, la région qui fait le lien avec l'AMR, dont l'Agence des régions du Maroc, l'assistance technique en complément et les donneurs ou les partenaires qui peuvent donc permettre de capitaliser et d'apporter une assistance technique à ce mécanisme. Donc voilà un petit peu les grandes lignes de ce qui est en train d'être fait au Maroc en termes d'efficacité énergétique. Merci.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Christelle. This has been incredibly informative, incredibly action-oriented, looking at solutions that are successful, that work on future savings that can be scaled, and you have plans to do that. So it's super exciting, and we look forward to kind of taking some of this forward with you where we can. Just very briefly, some of the other things that we're doing at GCOM and with our City Network partners is also having a broader conversation around the MDB reform piece, in particular the World Bank, but also other multilateral development banks, about making sure that cities are able to access finance directly and that there is vertical alignment with their national governments, and we really welcome as GCOM these conversations. So I'm going to pass over to Jamila now, who's going to help us look a little bit forward. We've asked for a few things, we've shared a few challenges, we've talked about a few solutions, and Jamila has very kindly joined us today as advisor to the UN High-Level Champion. Jamila has over 15 years of experience in environmental and sustainability strategy and policy development, and has a background with the government of Dubai, holding several positions in the private sector around city advisory and consulting. So Jamila, let me hand over to you to pass on some of this messaging and some of the thinking that we've been doing today.
Thank you, Asma. I think unlike everybody else on this panel, I'm not from the finance world, so I will not talk about any technicalities. I think I'll just talk about the movement and I mean the discussions that we've been hearing and probably a bit of the looking forward. I think, so before COP28 came, blended finance has become an increasingly growing topic. When I was part of the Dubai government, I was in direct contact with the C40 network of cities. We did quite a bit of work on looking at finance at a local level. There are these challenges, creditworthiness of cities, access, the time required to access the finance, the type of finance. Greg, you mentioned the difference between developed and developing cities. So these are all messages that we are hearing now, again, in the lead up to COP28. I think what's a bit refreshing is the evolution and the innovation in this space. I think everybody working in this space is really shifting. I think the NGOs and everybody on this panel is part of the solution. You're evolving in terms of the solution provision. Our role as COP28 really is twofold. Identifying synergies between people that are coming our way to say we want to collaborate, and then we find synergies and helping these partnerships grow in impact, and platforming success stories, as well as raising these demands on the platforms that are available to us, especially from a high-level champions point of view. We're really looking at non-state actor players, and our role is really to mobilize action, raise ambition. And what we can do, because we're not executive bodies, right? We're only here as spokespeople, advocacy players. What we can do is repeat the same messages you give us in different platforms, and then help this convening. I think another thing that's really evolving very quickly is this blended finance concept. We spoke about cities, finance for cities, but I think one thing that we're seeing is that finance for cities is sometimes not coming through cities. So if you think of what's happening in the real estate sector, divesting movement has really put a lot of pressures on developers to become much more conscious. And then developers start investing in supply chains, in greening supply chains, which is your blended finance without having an MOU with the municipality, right? Because they won't get good credit from their investors if they don't invest in green supply chains. Same thing for retailers. On the developing side, what we're seeing as a new player come on board are the insurance companies, and I think more recently in the Bonn dialogues, we had really two good examples where the insurance companies formed a gathering to cover income losses from around thousands of women workers, single moms in India, because they were required to go outside and work. And if it was too hot, then either they went outside and became sick, and then this was an additional burden on the social welfare bill, or you could pay them to stay at home and not get sick, but they'd still get their income. So these are innovative ways of finance, and it's still commercially viable if you broaden your perspective, where you minimize the bill on the social welfare by providing a form of climate finance for adaptation. You're adapting this community, you're helping them adapt to the growing global warming. So I think we hear the challenges, we are seeing some of the solutions. COP is like a marathon. Every COP is a milestone to another. Actually somebody told me it's not a good analogy because a marathon ends and there's no real end, right? So it is a journey, and we're only going to take it as much as we can. What we are trying to do is really consult and learn from everybody, all the players that are on this panel and outside in different regions. What are the challenges? What are the solutions? How we can grow their impact in the coming 6 months, and then also having a vision beyond COP28 to give it as a legacy for the coming COP. I'll stop here, but yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jamila, and it's great that you're able to join us, and it's great that cities will have a place at the table at this year's COP.
Yeah, I was going to say, there is a day dedicated to cities, so there will be plenty of time to platform success stories and talk about challenges as well. Yep.
So thank you very much. We've talked about challenges, we've talked about the urgency around climate finance at the local level. We've talked a little bit about some of these solutions that we're bringing forward and maybe some that we want to kind of test out. I hope you've enjoyed the session and learned some new things too and made some new connections. And thank you very much to the panelists as well for your time late on a Friday. Thank you very much.